Welcome to Grabbing System Overview. So in this video, we're going to do a quick look at the end result of the next few videos because it's going to be a little mini-series about how to create a grabbing system so we can actually pick up the chair and put it on the pressure plate. A very useful general tool, right, in a game to be able to pick something up and move it. So you can try and think about how it may be done as a part of this video, and I'll be outlining how we'll be doing it. So you can think about it, work out what your questions and concerns are, and then I will show you my solution and outline the end result. So we won't actually be doing any changing or any coding, we'll just be getting a mental model of how it all fits together. So let's dive in and do that and just watch this video, nothing to actually do in Unreal until the next video. So let's take a look at roughly how this may end up. We're going to play the game. The idea is that as we move around, we're constantly sending out a beam that decides what we're going to collide with. When we get close enough to the chair, we suddenly grab hold of it, and that means we can then move and manipulate it around the scene. Okay, so how may this work? Well, the first thing I want you to do is just write down your ideas using your knowledge to date as to how it might work. Use the knowledge you have already. Would you use a component to do this, or would you use inheritance? Hint, either could work. I just want to hear you reasoning to yourself at this stage. So do it in the discussions with the other students. How might you know what to grab? How might you ask the game what to grab? You see, you don't know the answers to these questions, but what I want to know is what your questions are. It'd be really interesting to see what you're thinking at this stage and what open questions you have, what ideas you have. And what game object would you be working with? So we want to know, what game object are we going to be working with? Are we going to make a specialization of it? Is it an is-a or is it a has-a? Do we put a component on? And then perhaps maybe how it's going to work. So I just want you to get in the habit of thinking about a chunk of work like this, like a grabbing system, that's going to take several lectures worth of teaching to get it out. And think about what the issues could be, and then be brave enough just to share them. And you don't have to have all the answers. Some of you will have great answers, some of you will just be full of questions. But that's part of the process, so have a go. Welcome back. So let's take an overview of how I plan to do the grabbing system. We want to be able to lift the chair next, as I said. So we'll add a grabber.cpp component to the player. Now remember that the player in this case is a default pawn, and it's a default pawn that we don't have access to until the game runs, which will introduce some interesting challenges. So the player is a temporary actor, and it appears on play. The player is a default pawn. A pawn is an actor. So the player, the temporary actor, the default pawn, they're all the same thing. And they don't appear until the game starts playing. It's the game mode which sets which default pawn to use. So we need to be making a modification to the game mode. So we're going to create a default pawn and a game mode blueprint. We're going to do both of those in Blueprint because it's just easier, and you'll see why a little bit later on. It avoids something called hard coding of assets. What that means is that we don't end up typing the exact name of our modified default pawn into code, because if we do that and then we change the name in the editor, then it won't be tracked. So we'll see why Blueprint is very useful for binding assets to our code. And once we have changed the game mode and made ourselves a new default pawn, we will specify our modified default pawn to the game mode. So all sounds a bit confusing, doesn't it? Let's work from the top and just think about it once more. Let me show you it in action. Bear in mind, your project won't look like this right now because I have set up this is the end result of the next few lectures, all right? So what I'm saying is that under project settings and maps and modes, what we're going to end up with is a different game mode. We're going to make a blueprinted version of our game mode. Previously, we had this set, and that doesn't let you choose the default pawn class here in the editor. You could do it in code, but we want to be able to do it in the editor. So we change to a blueprint version after having made it. We will then make a new default pawn blueprint. I'll show you that in a minute and specify it here. The default mode pawn blueprint thingy will be here, and it will be something that we could create in the world like this. I've modified the shape into a rugby ball to prove that it's a different version, and that thing there can be edited. We can change the default pawn, and we can change its size and its shape, and crucially we can change the fact that it has a grabber on it. So we'll make this different, slightly odd shaped default pawn. We'll probably put the shape back afterwards, and just to prove that we're making changes, and that the grabber component will be added. So once we've done that and we've made this default pawn thing that's based on pawn, we will then be able to pass that to the game mode and say, here game mode, this is the thing that you need to be instantiating when the game starts, this new default pawn underscore BP for blueprint. All right, so that's an overview of how we're going to do all this. Remains next to just get on and make that happen. But before we do, I just want to tell you a tiny bit more about game mode so that you can go off and read about it. So Unreal describes the game mode as anything from what inventory items a player starts with or how many lives are available to time limits and the score needed to end the game belongs to game mode. So the parameters, the rules of the game in general. You can go ahead and click that link there from the digital version of the slides or just Google for it and read a little bit more about Unreal's game mode now. And I'll see you in the next video when we'll start putting it all together.